but we can bring God's qualities and consciousness to flow through us and serve others in His name. And that's what we're here for.
In thy love I am free.
Good morning. Well, we all have to start somewhere. And there were three people working in the synagogue one day. And the head rabbi, filled with inspiration, threw himself down on the floor and said, "I am nothing, I am nothing." And the assistant rabbi, seeing this expression of devotion, thought to follow suit, and so he threw himself on the floor and said, "I am nothing, I am nothing." Well, the janitor, who happened to step in to the synagogue at that moment, he was sweeping in other places, thought, "Wow, I can do this too." So he threw himself down and exclaimed, "I am nothing, I am nothing." And the one rabbi looked at the other and goes, "Look at who thinks he's nothing." So we all have to start somewhere. And the truth is that nothingness is true in one regard, but so clearly not true in others. We've come originally from God, and our journey is to embrace what we've been given each lifetime. So we've been given a body. It's a good vehicle, and it can also start giving us trouble. So what? What's the difference? Because we are incarnated to do God's work. And we come with a bundle of karma, so it gets a little complicated. So for all of us, we have the burning question, what am I supposed to do? Now, many people think it's, what am I supposed to do? But it's more, God, what am I supposed to do this time? What lessons am I to learn this time? How can I bring your light through this time? And so the great search is on. There's a book I read many, many years ago. It's called "And Then There Was Light." And it speaks very interestingly about what it is like to come from the light and the freedom from the body, and then get into the body, because now the doorways are all of our senses, but there's inner doorways. And this story, "And Then There Was Light," is about a French boy who had his sight until he was 12 years old. So he had figured, he got a sense of what the world was. But at 12 years old, he had an accident and he became blind. His parents were very wise, and his circumstance was such that they never treated him as if he were blind, and he insisted that he never be treated as if he were blind. No extra care, no extra concern, no hanging around. And he realized he could see in a different way. He could pick up the energy of where the chairs were, where the table was, where the doors were. He could, and then using his hands to feel, but he just navigated in the world with God's light. And at one point, his parents asked him if he might help another young man in the community where they were living, help him because he was getting very dark in his consciousness, and he was very concerned. So Jacques went to help him, and the boy said to him, "You're crazy, I can't see," and just dismissed it. A missed opportunity, unfortunately. This man was able to go through the world with such confidence and so much awareness of the light within him that he became one of the great members of the French resistance during the war. And the reason is he had incredible intuition about other people. He could sense their energies. So when anyone came into where he was working, the resistance team he was working with, Jacques was the one to interview them. And the words that came out of the mouths of these people were often the right words, fighting for the country and for the good. But he could sense there was an ulterior motive, or there was other motivations in them. And he would say, "Don't take him." And often they were very surprised because they didn't have that insight. But they said, "All right, let's see." And it turned out to be the case in every circumstance. So this man had a very fruitful life. And what an interesting job God gave him this time. And he met that karma. And he served the light without one of his physical senses. So we know now through the science of yoga and through science itself that our sensory organs are only picking up a very small part of the world that we inhabit. Just a very small part. And at some point in our lives, all of us who sit here have gotten the notion that there's more to it than this. Something else is going on. That comes through our intuition, and that comes because there is something else within us that can receive that wonderful shining something else. That we are astrolabes. Astrolabes were circular, and they had a few moving parts, but they were the first ways in which ships could navigate where they were going. And physically, I became fascinated by astrolabes about 12 or 15 years ago, just the look of them. So I began collecting them. And then I made a collage because it's a beautiful, very textured, round metal surface. So it cut out of a science magazine. It became the focal point. And above that astrolabe, I put a picture of Master. And then I put in there, I do collage. Anyway, then I put in there some planets spinning so you could get a sense of space in that picture. And I had it with me at the thrift store. Ananda had a thrift store for many years, and we served that community in Shoreline, and it was a wonderful, with these wonderful ladies right in front of me, and others. There was a gentleman who would come in, and he was a great lover of art, and he was very generous in his spirit, and he introduced me to books on Japanese art. No, these are for you, these are for you, and we just would have wonderful conversations. This was Tom, if you remember Tom. Yeah, his persona was grumpy, but his heart was just pure. Anyway, he would buy some of my collage cards, and so he came across this one, and he looked at it, and he said, "You know what Aristotle said?" And I said, "No." "Man is the astrolabe of God." Now think about it. Man is the astrolabe of God. We are particularly put together in order to find God and merge with God and be abiding in God. That is such a wonderful thing to remember. It's the most important. So we're not out here to do what we think we should do. We're out here this time, once again, to do the job God wanted us to do. And He wants each of us to work for Him, to bring in the light, to help people to recognize this is a tiny bit of the game. It's a tiny bit. It's a funny game to send us into the world from the purity of the light, but it is what it is. It's somehow what we signed up for, so here we are. I am the vine and ye are the branches. How more connected could you get than that? And he that abideth in me will bringeth forth much fruit. Ananda is a perfect example of that, you know. Swamiji never allowed himself to get discouraged because his understanding, his realization, when we first met him, because he had spent 3.5 years with Paramahansa Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here, he was totally convinced that he was just a vehicle for God. And so nothing discouraged him because he said, well, God's in charge. I stay open. I stay attuned, which all of us can do. And so whatever work Master wants, whatever work God wants, can be done. And he opened himself to that possibility. That's what we can do also. That's what we have been doing. There are so many miracles in the development of Ananda that have nothing to do with the human effort. Or another way to say it is it has everything to do with the human effort. But it has in it the fact that we've picked up the task. We got it. We finally got it. And I remember when Kriyananda said, Kriyananda is just an event for which I am responsible. Think about that in your own life. I am an event. Jamuna is an event for which I am responsible. That gives you the kind of distance you need from yourself and your interest. So you need to find out who you are and how is that perceived from the spiritual perspective. It's not necessarily the psychological perspective, because we come in with so much experience. We've been going through so many lifetimes with different ways in which we are trying to get the story straight. Once we have learned a technique of concentration, it gives us the ability to tune directly to our Creator and get the word. You have to be careful because it's a process that has to be built on. We have to understand sometimes what we get is what we want, but not what God wants. There's the funny story of the fellow just asking God, you know, what do you want me to do? And he got an answer, I want you to become one with me. And he asked again, and he got a similar answer. And then he said, is there anyone else up there? I'd like a different answer. There's a lovely story that I'm so grateful to Brad for digging out and finding for me, but it's a story out of the brotherhood that St. Francis gathered around him. St. Francis, Yogananda called his patron saint. The quality of his love for God, the doing for God what God asked, whether he got it straight or not, just saying, okay, and he made his attempt. That's how he built the little church of San Damiano. Actually, that little humble monk changed the course of the Catholic Church, deepened it and enriched it by his connection with God. Anyway, there's a story amongst the brotherhood of a brother named Jerome. Jerome was very simple in his thinking and very attuned. And he didn't have a lot of judgment. You know, people would come to where the brothers were gathered and ask them for help in one way or another. And one day a fellow came and said, I need some money. Why don't you give me one of those things, one of those, objects on your altar? And Jerome said, okay. And he handed him something valuable. And the superior went ballistic, chewed him out, gave him a real scolding. And Jerome's thought was, golly, his throat must be sore from yelling at me so loud. Just imagine. And he said, I think I want to do something for him. So he got up in the middle of the night and he made him a bowl of porridge. And he went to the bishop, I don't know whether he was, but he went to the bishop in the middle of the night, woke him up and said, Sir, I have a feeling this might soothe your throat. Would you like this? The guy once again went ballistic. What's the matter with you? And just behaved really badly. And so there was Jerome, and he had the porridge, and he had a little candle, and he said, well, would you hold the candle for me while I eat the porridge? The guy was disarmed. He was just totally disarmed. And that's how we can move through life if we abide in God. It's more than, it's a wonderful word. It's more than, well, I can't say it's more than loving, because loving is all of it, but it's an expression of loving that captures you completely. And you can do it because the setup is actually all for us. As the affirmation said, consideration for others. My roommate Carol sent me the most amazing link this morning. It was the story of a man. I think he was in a big city. I'm not sure which one it is. And he was very good at doing portraits. And he got the inspiration to go out on the streets and do as many portraits of the homeless people as would say yes to him. And the video shows you his proposal to one man and a lady and another. Their absolute delight and like, how did this happen to me? And so not only did they sit for the portrait, but he depicted them. The likeness was perfect. He always got the eyes. Even if he had one of his portraits with the sunglasses hanging down and the eyes coming through, because that's how that guy was sort of wearing his sunglasses. Then showing the portraits to the people in the midst of that sorrowful time in their lives. They had been seen. Not only seen, but they had been loved through that portraiture. It was extraordinary. Now, the other thing this man was inspired to do was to sell the portraits and give the money to the people. Then there was that second layer, and you saw it again in the video. You bought my painting? You bought the painting of me? Thrilled, because that's who we are no matter what our circumstance. And we are all abiding in God, no matter what our circumstances, no matter whether we're aware of it. But just think of the impact that experience had on those individuals. They're you and me in tough situations. When Swamiji was, I think it was proposed to him that we do a movie on Ananda, and maybe he was in touch with people who would know how to do that. But Ananda created a movie called Finding Happiness, and it is filmed at Ananda Village. And it's wonderful to listen to the stories of the Ananda folks that were involved, because they were involved in all kinds of things, supporting this professional staff of filmmakers and supporting all the actors. And then there was a good number of Ananda folks who are the actors in this movie. You can get it on YouTube. So I suggest tonight, for your entertainment, watch Finding Happiness. And Swami wept. He just broke down and wept after seeing that film. And he said, "You were all just yourselves. It was so authentic. You were just who you are." And think about it. It's not that you're the behaviors that you want to lift off your shoulders. It's the deepest love of your heart that he saw. And each one of it expresses that in our own particular way. And that's our job, to know ourselves, to get to know who we are. Well, who we are is branches on the vine. That's it. And we come out as all these different people with these different personalities, having these different experiences. And it's just because God's thrown us into this polarity of a world. But we can bring God's qualities and consciousness to flow through us and serve others in his name. And that's what we're here for. I think I have one more story, and it's about Brother Lawrence practicing the presence, because that's what we're talking about, really. But it's practicing a presence which we're aware of. It's not practicing a presence which we feel on Sunday morning, perhaps, or which we feel in a really good meditation. It's practicing a presence because that's where we live. And Brother Lawrence felt he had a lot of feelings about his unworthiness. Who doesn't go through that at some point in time? And he joined a monastery, and he just decided, well, all the things that the priest taught them to do, he couldn't quite catch on. He couldn't quite get it. He felt like, interestingly, it got in his way. So he said, I'll just pretend as if God and I were the only people in the world. And I'll just think of God all the time. So he was in charge in the kitchen of doing the dishes. And eventually he was able to say, I feel the presence of God as much at my kitchen sink as I do in front of the altar. Thank you.
Oh, my